Hi, future legends. Welcome to English Story School. Part 1. The question that starts the fire. How much pain can one person survive before they turn into someone unstoppable? It was January 3rd, the kind of night that could freeze a man's bones. The city seemed alive with lights, laughter, and rushing cars, but for Ryan, the world had stopped. In one single phone call, his entire life collapsed. His business, bankrupt. His fiancée, gone without a trace, leaving nothing but silence. His closest friend, the one he trusted more than anyone, had betrayed him in a deal so cruel it left him drowning in debt. And as if the universe wanted to crush him completely, his landlord handed him an eviction notice. 30 days. That's all he had before he'd lose even the roof over his head. Ryan stumbled into the cold streets that night, his breath visible in the air, his mind a whirlwind of disbelief. He ended up on a park bench, alone, staring at the ground as the icy wind cut through his jacket. People walked by, couples holding hands, businessmen rushing home, children laughing. Yet no one noticed him. To them, he was invisible, and in that suffocating silence, he thought he could hear the world whispering, "It's over for you." But here's the truth. Pain has two faces. One breaks you, the other makes you unbreakable. Ryan didn't know it yet, but this was not the end. This was the beginning of a fire that would either consume him or forge him into steel. He closed his eyes, replaying the betrayal, the abandonment, the loss. His heart felt like it had been ripped open, but underneath that wound was a strange spark. Anger, defiance, something raw that refused to die. A voice inside whispered, "What if this pain isn't punishment? What if it's preparation?" As he sat there, trembling from the cold and the weight of his failures, a memory surfaced. His father's words. A man isn't measured by how he lives when everything is easy. He's measured by how he rises when everything is falling apart. Ryan had brushed off those words years ago, but now they struck like thunder. He realized that he had two choices: drown in the ashes of his life or crawl out of the fire, piece by piece, until he became someone unrecognizable, someone unstoppable. The bench beneath him felt harder, the night colder, and yet his mind grew sharper. He looked around and noticed something he hadn't before: the indifference of the world. Nobody cared. Nobody stopped to ask if he was okay. Nobody handed him a blanket or a dollar. That's when the truth hit him like a hammer. No one is coming to save me. And strangely, that thought gave him power. Because if no one was coming, then it meant he had to save himself. Ryan clenched his fists as if trying to grab hold of his own destiny. His breath grew heavy, and with it, his determination. "I will not die here," he muttered under his breath, his words carried away by the wind. "I will not end as a forgotten man on a bench." They say every legend begins with a breaking point, a night so dark it forces the soul to make a choice. That night was Ryan's. He felt his pain transform into something else, something sharper, something almost alive. It wasn't hope, not yet, but it was the spark of defiance. Sometimes rock bottom is the solid foundation you never knew you needed. He thought about the people who had left him, the ones who had turned their backs. Did they think he was finished? Did they imagine him destroyed, broken, begging for mercy? The thought made his blood boil. He whispered to himself, "They will regret this." Every single one of them will regret thinking I was weak. A man sitting a few benches away glanced at him, startled by the intensity in his eyes. But Ryan didn't care. He wasn't speaking to the stranger. He was speaking to his own future. The cold gnawed at him, yet inside, a strange fire burned hotter. He could feel it, the shift, the invisible moment where a man stops being a victim and starts becoming a fighter. Pain shapes you. Betrayal sharpens you. Loss frees you. And Ryan, in that single night, began to realize that maybe losing everything wasn't the end. Maybe it was the only way to rebuild himself into someone who could never be broken again. He stood from the bench, legs stiff and trembling, but with a new weight in his chest. Not the weight of defeat, the weight of resolve. He didn't know where he would sleep tomorrow, how he would eat, or how he would ever climb out of the pit he was in. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was not his ending. It was the question that started the fire. How much pain can one person survive before they turn into someone unstoppable? And Ryan was about to find out. Quote for this moment: "Rock bottom isn't the end, it's the start line for the brave." Part 2. The fall before the rise. The first months were brutal. Not the kind of struggle you casually talk about, but the kind that breaks men in silence. Ryan found himself working 14-hour shifts at a warehouse, his days blending into one long nightmare of sweat, exhaustion, and aching muscles. The work was relentless. Heavy crates sliced open his palms until his hands bled, the coarse rope of pallets burning into his skin. Every night, his back screamed in agony as if his spine were giving up on him. He'd collapse onto a thin mattress in his rented room, the ceiling cracked and water-stained, and stare into the dark wondering if this was what failure felt like. Endless, heavy, and merciless. And yet, even as his body gave way to exhaustion, Ryan refused to let his mind break. He knew bills were piling up like enemies waiting outside his door. Letters marked "Final Notice" arrived almost weekly. Debt collectors called him like vultures circling a dying animal. Still, every morning, Ryan forced himself out of bed before dawn, poured himself a cup of cold instant coffee, and repeated one thought: "Nobody is coming to save me." But unlike before, that thought didn't scare him anymore. No, it fueled him. There was a grim freedom in realizing the world owed him nothing. No saviors, no shortcuts, no miracles, just him against the storm. And once he accepted that, every bruise, every ache, every sleepless night became proof that he could endure what others could not. The strongest steel is forged in the hottest fire. Ryan decided he wouldn't just survive, he would transform. He started carrying a notebook in his pocket, scribbling down ideas during his breaks. While other workers smoked or scrolled through their phones, he studied. He downloaded business audiobooks and podcasts, listening as he hauled crates and dragged pallets across the cold warehouse floor. Every word, every idea became a seed he planted in his mind. He didn't waste evenings on Netflix anymore. Instead, he invested those hours into online courses, studying marketing, finance, and resilience. He stopped scrolling through social media and started scrolling through biographies of people who had turned their suffering into success. And slowly, painfully, a shift began. He noticed something strange. While his body was being punished daily, his mind was sharpening. His discipline grew. His focus became relentless. He realized that suffering, when endured with purpose, could become strength. Discipline is the bridge between goals and achievement. One night, after an especially brutal shift, Ryan's coworker Tom invited him to the bar. "Man, you need a break." "Just one beer," Tom said, tossing him a half smile. For a moment, Ryan almost agreed. He wanted to drown everything, the pain, the fear, the death. But then he remembered the last time he had chosen comfort over progress. That's when his business had crumbled. That's when his life had spiraled. So he shook his head. "No, I have something to do," he replied quietly. Tom laughed. "Yeah? And what's more important than a drink right now?" Ryan's eyes hardened. "Building a life I'll never have to escape from." That night, instead of numbing himself at a bar, Ryan sat in his small room with his secondhand laptop, eyes burning from fatigue, but his heart alive with a fire that no alcohol could ever give him. Day after day, he repeated this choice: to suffer now so he could rise later, to deny comfort so he could earn freedom, to sacrifice evenings of mindless escape for nights of intentional growth. And yet, the loneliness was heavy. His phone barely rang anymore. Friends who had once cheered for him when he was successful had disappeared. His fiancée's silence was louder than any words. The betrayal of his closest friend stung like an open wound that refused to heal. Sometimes he lay awake at night wondering, am I really strong or just stubborn? But each morning, when the alarm pierced through his shallow sleep, Ryan got up anyway. He forced his body into motion, fueled by nothing but black coffee and raw determination. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet voice at the end of the day saying, I will try again tomorrow. One evening, after another grueling shift, Ryan sat alone on the warehouse steps, watching the sunset bleed across the horizon. His shirt clung to him with sweat, his muscles burned, and yet, deep inside, he felt a strange pride. Because every day he chose to rise again, he was becoming someone new, someone tougher, someone who refused to break. And then it hit him. This was the fall before the rise. This suffering wasn't punishment. It was preparation. The universe wasn't ending his story. It was sharpening his character, testing his resolve, and hardening his spirit for something greater. For the first time in months, Ryan smiled. Not because life had gotten easier. It hadn't. Not because his debts had disappeared. They hadn't. But because he was learning that pain didn't define him. His response to it did. Life doesn't get easier or more forgiving. We get stronger and more resilient. He folded his notebook shut that night with a new thought. If I can endure this, there's nothing I can't endure. And if I can rebuild once, I can rebuild bigger. Ryan didn't know when or how the rise would come. But he knew this. Every book, every course, every moment of pain was laying the foundation for something legendary. And someday, the same people who looked down on him would look up to him. The fall was breaking him down, yes, but it was also building the man who would rise. Quote that kept him alive: suffer now, so the rest of your life can feel like freedom. Part 3, the turning point. By the 6th month, Ryan was no longer the same man who had once sat broken on a park bench. The exhaustion of 14-hour shifts and endless studying had sharpened something inside him. And then, almost like a whisper from his past, his old instincts for entrepreneurship began to return. He remembered the thrill of building something with his own hands, the satisfaction of creating value where others only saw problems. One evening, while scrolling through an online marketplace, he noticed something strange. There was a growing demand for custom woodwork designs. Tables, shelves, wall pieces. People were paying high prices for handcrafted work, but the market was flooded with overpriced or low-quality items. His heart began to race. He saw it, the gap, the opportunity. With only $180 scraped together from his warehouse paychecks, Ryan walked into a dusty pawn shop. The tools looked worn, their handles chipped, their blades dulled, but to Ryan, they gleamed like weapons. He purchased a small saw, a few chisels, a sander, and sandpaper. That night, in the corner of his small garage, he set up what would become his battlefield. The first attempts were ugly. His cuts were uneven, his joints misaligned, his finishes rough. He delivered a few early pieces to local customers, hoping for praise, but instead, he received complaints. One customer returned a coffee table with a sneer. "This looks like it's made by a beginner." Those words pierced deeper than any knife. For a moment, Ryan felt his chest tighten. He could almost hear the world mocking him again, just as it had on that cold January night. "You're not good enough." But instead of breaking, Ryan clenched his jaw. "I'm a beginner," he muttered, but not for long. Every master was once a beginner who refused to quit. So he doubled down. After 14 hours in the warehouse, he would spend another 6 to 7 hours in the garage. He stayed up until 3 a.m., sweat dripping as he sanded boards until his fingers blistered and bled. He watched hours of YouTube tutorials, studying angles, joints, and techniques like his life depended on it, because it did. He wasn't just making furniture. He was carving out a new version of himself, one cut at a time. The garage became his sanctuary and his prison. The air was thick with sawdust, the floor littered with scraps of wood. He kept a notebook filled with designs, sketches, and mistakes, because every mistake became a lesson. He forced himself to improve. Piece by piece, night after night, his work grew cleaner, sharper, more precise. And then it happened. An order came in from a local cafe owner who had seen one of his shelves. Ryan poured every ounce of energy into it, sanding until the surface was glass smooth, staining until the wood glowed. When he delivered it, the cafe owner stared for a moment, ran his hand along the edge, and finally smiled. This is good. I'll need more." Ryan left the cafe with a check in hand and tears in his eyes. It wasn't just money, it was proof. Proof that he could climb, that he wasn't stuck in the ashes forever. Orders started trickling in. First one a week, then 2, then 5. His evenings became consumed with measurements, sanding, staining, packaging, and deliveries. He barely slept, but he didn't care. The exhaustion no longer felt like suffering. It felt like fuel. Find something worth suffering for, and suddenly, the pain feels different. Every dollar he earned went back into the business. While his coworkers at the warehouse spent paychecks on clothes, nights out, or drinks, Ryan tightened his belt even further. He wore the same shoes until they nearly fell apart. He didn't buy new clothes, didn't go to bars, didn't waste a cent. He reinvested every penny into better tools, higher quality wood, and improving his craft. The business became more than a side hustle. It became his oxygen. Every knock of the hammer, every grain of sanded wood, every finished piece was another breath keeping him alive. There were nights he fell asleep on the garage floor, covered in sawdust, too tired to climb into bed. But when he opened his eyes in the morning and saw the half-finished pieces waiting for him, he felt something electric surge through his veins. For the first time since his downfall, he had purpose. Yet the struggle was far from over. Some customers still criticized him. His hands bore scars and blisters that refused to heal. His body ached from working 2 full-time lives, one at the warehouse, one in the garage. But now he welcomed the pain. Do not pray for an easy life. Pray for the strength to endure a difficult one. And Ryan endured. With every passing week, his skills sharpened, his confidence grew, and his reputation quietly spread. He wasn't making much yet, certainly not enough to climb out of his debt, but he was building momentum. And momentum, he realized, was everything. He taped a piece of paper to the garage wall with a single sentence. This is where legends are made. Every time he felt like quitting, every time his hands shook from fatigue, he would look at those words and remind himself why he started. Ryan had found his turning point. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't an overnight success story. It was a garage filled with dust, sweat, scars, and silent determination. But sometimes the greatest revolutions begin in the smallest of rooms. And Ryan's revolution had just begun. Quote for this climb: when you're obsessed, you don't need motivation. You need more hours in the day. Part 4. The Breakthrough Battle. By the 10th month, Ryan's life had shifted in a way he could barely recognize. What started in a dusty garage with secondhand tools had now begun to roar into something far bigger. His business was no longer just a survival project. It was becoming a movement. Photos of his handcrafted furniture began circulating on social media. At first, it was just a handful of shares, then dozens, and then hundreds. People admired the detail, the grit, and the raw beauty of his work. And then it happened. A major influencer stumbled across his designs and featured his shelf in a video that reached millions. Within 48 hours, Ryan's inbox exploded. Emails, messages, calls, more orders than he could possibly handle. For the first time in nearly a year, he felt the weight of momentum slam into his chest like a tidal wave. But success didn't walk in gently. It didn't come wearing a silk robe, offering comfort and rest. No, success arrived like a warrior in heavy armor, demanding a battle. Success is not served on a silver platter. It's earned on a battlefield. With the surge of attention came competitors. Established businesses began copying his designs, undercutting his prices, and flooding the market. Customers who had once been patient now grew impatient with the sudden delays. His suppliers faltered under the pressure, and one massive order nearly destroyed him when a shipment of would never arrived. The deal had been worth thousands, money he desperately needed to scale. And for a moment, it looked like everything would collapse all over again. But Ryan didn't flinch. He had already been through the worst. He knew what it felt like to lose everything. The sting of betrayal, the cold bench in the park, the crushing weight of debt. Compared to that, these new challenges weren't walls. They were hurdles. And hurdles could be jumped. So he fought. When competitors stole his designs, Ryan didn't waste time crying foul. Instead, he made his designs sharper, bolder, and better. He reminded himself, don't compete where they are. Compete where they can't go, into your vision, your originality, your relentless drive. When shipping delays threatened his contracts, He got in his car and drove for hours, picking up supplies himself. There were nights when he personally delivered finished orders in the pouring rain, his clothes soaked, his hands numb, but his spirit untouchable. Customers didn't just see a man selling furniture. They saw a man who would bleed for his promises. And that, more than anything, built trust. One evening, after a 20-hour marathon of work, Ryan collapsed on his garage floor, surrounded by unfinished pieces. His body begged him to quit. His mind whispered, "It's too much. You can't keep going like this." But then he thought about the people who once doubted him, the ones who said he'd never rise again. He pictured their voices and felt a fire rage inside his chest. The moment you feel like quitting is the exact moment you must push harder. And he pushed. He started hiring part-time help, teaching them the craft he had bled for. He reinvested every dollar, buying better machines, upgrading his tools, and expanding his garage into a full workshop. The same hands that once blistered on rough sandpaper now guided apprentices with precision and authority. But make no mistake, the battle never stopped. There were weeks when he nearly broke down from exhaustion. Days when payments were delayed, supplies ran short, or customers demanded refunds. Nights when he lay awake, wondering if success was worth the weight it carried. Yet every time doubt tried to drown him, Ryan reminded himself of one truth. He had already survived the fire. If he could survive losing everything, he could survive anything. Hard times create strong men. Strong men create change. The rain-soaked deliveries, the endless negotiations, the sleepless nights, these became his weapons. While others folded under pressure, Ryan grew stronger. The same pressure that crushed others became the very force that shaped him. And slowly, people began to notice. Customers didn't just praise his products. They admired his relentless character. They shared not just his shelves and tables, but his story. His resilience became his brand. His struggle became his marketing. His scars became his credibility. The business wasn't just growing, it was exploding. But Ryan knew better than anyone. Explosions could destroy if not controlled. And so, while others celebrated his overnight success, Ryan prepared for the next war. Because he understood now that success wasn't a destination, it was a series of battles. And he was ready to fight them all. A warrior's greatest victory is not winning against others, but winning against himself. Month 10 wasn't the end of Ryan's struggle. It was only the beginning of a new battlefield, one where the stakes were higher, the enemies sharper, and the victory sweeter. And Ryan? He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was conquering. Quote for this victory lap: "People don't just buy what you make, they buy who you are when the storm hits." Part 5. The Legend is Born. Exactly 1 year from the night Ryan lost everything, he stood inside his new workshop. The smell of fresh wood, oil, and machine grease filled the air. The sound of drills and saws was no longer frightening. It was music, the rhythm of survival turned into success. Employees bustled around, their shirts damp with effort, their eyes alive with purpose. Machines hummed steadily like loyal companions, no longer mocking him with silence, but working in his favor. His bank account, once emptier than his fridge, now carried the kind of numbers he once thought belonged only to other people. The same landlord who had tossed him onto the street with nothing but his broken tools? Ryan had just signed the papers to buy a property twice the size, just a block away. The landlord passed him on the street last week and gave him a nod heavy with regret, mixed with disbelief. Life had a funny way of turning tables, and Ryan had learned that when pain becomes your teacher, even your enemies end up being your audience. Reporters came with cameras and questions. They wanted a dramatic answer, some secret formula, something flashy. "How did you do it?" one asked. Microphone stretched toward him. Ryan smiled, not with arrogance, but with the kind of peace only scars can give. "I didn't," he said. "The pain did. I just didn't quit when it hit me." The words hung in the air, sinking deep into everyone who heard them. Some reporters blinked, as if they had expected a motivational quote they could print and move on. But this wasn't a quote. It was a confession. Ryan had fought nights where his body begged him to stop, mornings where he couldn't look at himself in the mirror without feeling the sting of failure. He remembered dinners of instant noodles, the cracked phone screen he couldn't afford to replace, the ache of walking past restaurants he used to eat at but couldn't anymore. Every small humiliation, every unpaid bill, every cold morning with no heating, it had all become bricks in the foundation of the man standing before them now. And that's the truth. That one painful year hadn't just tested him, it had reshaped him. The man who once thought success was about money now understood it was about resilience. The man who once cried over doors being slammed in his face now realized every slammed door had taught him how to build his own. Ryan knew the cameras would eventually turn away, the applause would fade, and people would move on to the next success story. But deep down, he didn't care about being a headline. What mattered was that he had survived his storm, and not just survived, but thrived. So if you're watching this, and you're in your painful year right now, don't curse it. Don't drown in self-pity. Use it. Let it sharpen you. Let it fuel you. That storm you think is here to destroy, you might just be the storm that forges you. Because Ryan's story isn't about luck or talent or even timing. It's about staying when everything inside you screams to leave. It's about showing up when no one claps for you. It's about trusting that pain isn't your enemy. It's your trainer. The nights of hunger, they gave him fire. The mornings of rejection, they gave him focus. The days of failure, they gave him fight. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, the man who was once broken became unbreakable. So remember this. Legends aren't made in comfort. They are born in discomfort, raised in storms, and crowned only after they refuse to surrender. Your painful year could be your legend year. Don't quit. Don't fold. Don't give up. Because if Ryan can rise from nothing, so can you. With that said, thanks for watching, and until next time.